today we're going to be tying the Atlantic salmon fly called Artillery. We're going to tie this fly. It's a pretty simple pattern, as you can see. There's not a whole lot going on here, but there's a lot of different techniques that are used, and there's a lot of different things that I wish I had learned early on when I started tying flies. They're just some simple tips to kind of help your flies look better. You tie them faster, you waste less material. So today we're going to be tying this on just a standard size 2 salmon hook. And the first tip that I'd like to share with you is, since we're going to be tying a fly here that has some really bright colored body on it, we're going to start with some white thread. So just any kind of white thread. And so before we get into this, we're going to be using some silver oval tinsel, some red uni stretch that I have loaded up on a bobbin here, some black uni stretch, just any kind of black hackle. This is a hen hackle. It's a little bit more thick, a little bit more dense like that. And then we'll top it off with black bear for the wing. So as I mentioned, when I'm tying flies that have bright bodies or bright tags, butts, whatever, I like to tie them with white thread. It just gives the floss or the color a little bit more impact. So we're going to start here with getting our tinsel ready. And one thing, again, I didn't learn until much later on in my fly tying career is I want the tinsel to be on the side of the hook. I never want it to be on top or bottom. And the only reason for that is the top or bottom shows bumps. So if we have it either on the back side or the front side, when we start our wraps, we're not going to see any bumps on the fly at all. So I'm just going to wrap this, and the tinsel is going to carry the thread forward. I don't mind going a little bit longer. So I did 4 wraps here. I don't mind going a little bit longer because I'll overlap that with some floss. And then I started the tinsel on the side. I also want to finish the tinsel on the side. So in this case here, we're going to drag this all the way to the front. And the only reason and the purpose for this technique is just so we keep the body uniform. And so by starting the tinsel in the front here, we again eliminate any kind of bumps or anything that we don't want near the back of the fly. So that's that for that. I'm just going to give this a few wraps here just to kind of start building a little bit of a body. You'll see why here in a minute. Now this fly also has a silver tinsel for the wrapping the body. So this is just a personal preference of mine, but this is small sized tinsel that I'm going to use for the body, and the back or the tags of the fly, I like to use a little bit thicker oval. It just kind of gives it a bit more flash, I guess, or a little bit more presence. So the same thing we did with the first tinsel, we're going to start this on the top, and then as I wrap, the thread is just carrying that to the back here. So this is, I guess, the front for me, is the back for you. So at this point, I'm going to use my white thread all the way up and back, and I'm going to be starting to build a little bit of a cigar-shaped body here for my fly. So I'm going to run that over there. And so what you'll notice is I'm starting at the front, I'm wrapping backwards, and I'm stopping a little bit shorter with each visit, each turn. So here, we're gonna go here. And you'll notice that I'm starting to build a little bit more size to the front of the fly here. So that's a good start. You can see how this is a little bit thicker than the back. So then I just want to clean everything up by just doing one full go all the way up and back. Maybe take a little bit more time on the way back here so we can kind of get everything nice and evened out. All right. So now we're going to use the red uni stretch. You can use red floss, or you could even use some wool if you want to. It just depends. So I'm just going to kind of get this guy started up here. We're going to kind of go about halfway back. And so I'm going to take this and I'll be done with the white thread now, so I can just do a quick half hitch. So I did that a bit quick. So basically all you need to do for this is it stops your thread from unwinding. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to wrap around our finger, touch the point of the hook here, and then just kind of drag that tight. And it takes all of the slack out of there. So now we can wrap our red uni in the back without any interference from thread. So now, since I've already built up the body a little bit, I don't want to put too much of this stuff on, but you'll notice if I wrap it loosely, it flattens out and it covers a lot of area. So what I can do is I can actually give my bobbin a little bit of a counterclockwise twist here, and it just helps the uni stretch or the product flatten out a bit. And you'll notice that it's quite wide where it touches the hook here. So every few turns, I'm just going to go give it a bit of a counterclock twist, rotation, I guess. And then when I get to the back, I just want to check to see the progress on both sides here. So that looks good. Give myself a little bit more, again, flatten it out. And so this will give it a much cleaner and softer look to the floss. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but I seem to have a little bit of a low spot in the middle here. So I'm actually going to go back and we're going to add just a little bit of size right there. Of course, the fish don't know the difference with this stuff, so it's not that critical. But now I'm done with the red, so I'm just gonna kind of give it a quick few little turns up front. I'm gonna start the black uni stretch this way. So this way I'm really, not wasting any product at all, or the least amount. And before I snip that, actually, yeah. So let's do that again. So if I had cut the red thread there, or the red floss, it was just going to drop the black. So I actually need to overlap the red with the black a little bit, just like that. And it doesn't have to be super neat right now. Now we're good to go here. Get rid of this guy. And with the same thing we did with the red, before I start, I'm just gonna give myself a little bit of counterclockwise wrap here. And since we're covering black with red, we wanna make sure we really do a good job at covering it all up here. And inevitably what's gonna happen here is we're gonna have a little bit of overlap from black to red. And we might even see, if we do a good job, we want the black and the red to be roughly the same size, but of course we want a cigar shape, so we're actually going to have a little bit more size on the black side, which is good right there. And I'll just do a few more like this. Oops. And as I'm doing the counterclockwise rotation, I can actually see when, along the line here, I can see when it actually flattens out the best. So that one's getting a little bit round. There we go. Oops. I want to take our time here and do it at a good pace. All right, so that I'm very satisfied with. So now I'll just get my black thread. Since we're wrapping black on black here, we don't have to be too conscious about what it looks like. And just a quick tip here, when I'm snipping stuff off like this, just to keep my thread out of the way, I like to kind of put it on the back side of my hand, and that just allows me to kind of isolate what I do want to cut and keep the thread out of the way, because you inevitably will cut your thread as you're going along. It's gonna happen, happens to all of us. We just want to do it less. So there we go. So now I'm gonna actually use my rotary vise to spin or to wrap the tinsel. So what I'm gonna do real quick here is I'm actually gonna go to the front. I'm gonna do another half hitch. I'm actually gonna do 2. Sometimes 2 works a little bit better. So that way when I'm wrapping my tinsel, the thread won't unravel and let the floss go. So I'm just gonna hold this kind of tight at an angle that I want. So probably about 60, 70 degrees. And I'm just gonna hold it at that angle and start wrapping. And if I look at everything and I notice that everything looks pretty well where I want it, good spacing, we'll unravel all that thread that wrapped up. And again, we want to finish this on the side of the hook. Even more important than in the front of the fly here. So maybe one of you can chime in on this, but I feel like somewhere along the lines I heard that a salmon fly should have 6 wraps on the body. When you're using tinsel to wrap the whole body, you're supposed to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wraps. That may or may not be correct in the Atlantic salmon fly tying world, but if you do have the answer to that, by all means, share it with me. I'd love to know. I think it's right, but I see a lot of videos and I see a lot of flies with less, so maybe I'm the one who's needs to adjust. So I just cut the tinsel. And so what I'm gonna do, just to remove the bulk, I'm just gonna take my thumbnail and I'm just gonna remove any of the tinsel that's on the thread, or sorry, on the oval wrap. And the reason why I wanna do that is, again, just removing bulk, but you'll notice now that it doesn't have that same shine. So now we have a really good looking fly so far. Now you can tie the wing or the throat first. I'm gonna do the throat. It's just, again, personal preference. I've always done it that way, but I'm just gonna grab my black hen hackle here. And I like to have the hackle look nice and full on my flies. So what I'll do is I'll actually use hackle from both sides of the feather. So you see me kind of rearranging the feather here. So I'm gonna take a little piece on this side and a little piece on this side. So about that much. I'm going to take that, and then I'm going to go on this side. And the reason why you want to straighten it out is because it gets all the tips to line up. So we'll do the same amount on this side. That looks about right. Straighten it out a little. And then I'm going to go lay that right on top of the other stuff that I had. Just like that. And so there we have it. Now we have the throat. So it doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical or aligned or anything like that. So I'm just going to take that, flip my vise around, rest that where I want it. So I don't want to go all the way to the back of the fly, and I also don't want to have it too short. So I like to have it just basically 2/3 of the way down the body is where I like to have my hackle throats finish. So what I'll do is I'll actually do 1.5 wraps. Take a look, that's a bit short there. So I'll do 2 wraps, reposition it right on the bottom here. Take a look at it. So again, that's pretty short again. So let's go a little bit longer. So we're just gonna kind of keep adjusting it this way. Okay, there we go. Now I'm happy with that. So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do 2 or 3 light wraps to allow me to move it around if I need to, or lengthen it, shorten it, whatever. And then I'll do a couple pretty stiff wraps. So when I go and I pull on this to cut it, the hackle's not gonna slide out. If I have the wraps too loose, then the hackle, as I'm cutting, will actually kind of work itself out here. So cut that out. And there's not much need to do a whole bunch of wrapping here, because we're gonna do that when we do the wing. So we can clean that up at that time. Again, we wanna reduce the bulk. And so one of the other tips here with tying an Atlantic salmon fly is you want to be very mindful of your proportions. I see a lot of newer fly tyers, they'll come on here, they'll rip a big old hunk of hair on there, and then they've got a head about this size on the fly. We don't need to have a whole lot of bulk. So I'll just take my black bear hair here and I'll separate a bit of it. And I just kind of pinch it together and just rest it on the fly to see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. It's a little bit on the heavy side, but it looks pretty good. So we'll take this, snip that off. And so now we have our black bear. This stuff here makes awesome dubbing. So get a jar, put it on your bench, keep this, and make some dubbing with it. It makes great dry fly dubbing. So I'll just clean that out. Take my comb and just kind of brush out any excess here. You can save that as well. Now for the wing, we want to stack the hair a little bit. And I don't like to have it all stacked. I like to have a little bit of variety in there. So before I stack it, to allow it to stack better, I'm actually going to cut maybe a 1/2 inch of this in the back here. And that just kind of shortens the hair, makes it a little bit easier to stack. So I'll throw out the stacker. 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, whatever bumps is working that day. So I have just the tip sticking out here. And I want to be careful when I pull this out. And now we'll just kind of pull any of the short hairs that are hanging around that don't need to be there. So that looks pretty good. Now the next step, and this is something I really wish I would have learned early on, is black bear, calf tail, bucktail. They're very slippery hairs. So we need to use a little bit of help when we're tying these. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna set this down on the fly here to see how far I want this, or the length I want it. I tend to like the flies to have just a bit short of the rear of the hook, or if we had a tail, it would be at the tip of the tail, or roughly about that. So that looks about right there. So I'm just gonna pinch that on the fly, and I want to cut this fur right at the tip where I want it here. So we're just gonna shave that down. Now we have a nice straight edge to work with. Before I tie that on, I'm just gonna take my fly tier's wax here and put some on the thread. And what this does, it helps the helps the thread from sliding when I wrap this. So just to give you a little bit of help with the black bear again, we're just gonna do one kind of loose wrap. And then once it's got as much of the fur that I want. I can move it back a little bit if I need to kind of pull it back, because we don't run a really big head on here. Once I'm happy where it is, I'm going to give it a really tight squeeze, and you'll see when I do that the hair almost kind of flares a little bit. So once that starts happening, that's as far as I want to go. And then I'll slowly wrap all of this up here, and you notice how the wax is helping the thread stay in place. And so now I can get a little bit tighter with my wraps. Before I get too far, we'll check the wing, see what that looks like. That looks pretty darn good. The wax has a bit of residue on it. Now we'll just do a cleanup wrap. And then just to kind of give a little bit of uniformity to the head, we can do a few extra wraps. But you'll notice with black bear, it doesn't really sit down very much. It kind of builds a little bit of bulk, which is one of the reasons why we want to make sure we don't put too much bulk when we're adding the hackle or any of that stuff. So we'll take our whip finisher, work from back to front. Some people like to do 3, 4 wraps. I usually like to do 4. And I'll just do a second one. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there we go. Now that's nice and tight. Give it a nice tight little tug here. Snip that off. And so the last tip about tying these types of flies is we want to make sure that our hair is going to stay on here. So what we can do is we can get really generous with the first dab. I'm going to put a whole lot in there because I want it to work through the fur. I want it to work through the thread and really attach the fur really good. And then we'll just kind of finish it off here. There's a bit of a debate going on right now in the fly tying world on whether or not we even need to finish the heads, because technically the whip finisher should be doing the job for us. So there you go. There's a bunch of tips to help you with your fly tying and help your flies look a little bit better and allow you to tie a little bit faster and save some materials. So if you get any questions about any of this stuff, or if there's a fly that you want me to tie specifically, please go ahead and comment, and I'll make a video for you. Thanks for watching.